Monolith was a game studio known for their epic games. For me, I was always a fan of their Lord of the Rings games specifically. The somewhat Assassin's Creed meets Batman Arkham style combat in the form of Shadow of Mordor and War. I know that we all loved the Nemesis system within those games and thought it was one of the most revolutionary game mechanics of the past 10 years. Allowing players to hunt or be hunted by seemingly infinite enemies that could evolve and change how they worked based on the actions of the player at hand. I remember when I first played Shadow of Mordor, I thought it was an amazing reimagining of a world that I was familiar with in my youth, and I played it non-stop till I hit 100%. Seeing that world of Mordor told through the lens of, let's be real, pretty much a Batman Arkham-like game. I mean, Rocksteady and Monolith are both owned by Warner Bros. After all. Ever wonder why that Mad Max game made by Avalanche also played like Batman Arkham? Yep, all Warner Bros, so they all pretty much just use the same combat system. And hey, I still think what the original Rocksteady did with that Batman combat system, that has never been topped pretty much. The DNA between Shadow of Mordor and War and the Batman Arkham series was this through line that just kinda worked. And they translated it into endlessly killing these orcs and being able to summon these gigantic monstrous creatures to swarm entire castles in Shadow of War. Man, what a pair of games Monolith made there. So when I heard that they were doing Wonder Woman, I got interested. I mean, they showed that they were able to create their own legit original story within the confines of Lord of the Rings. And Wonder Woman is a demigod warrior woman who also fights monsters and, well, demons too, I guess, but the DNA through line made sense to go from Shadow of War to this DC property. It was pretty much a match made in heaven if I ever saw one. We were long overdue for a proper Wonder Woman game as well. I always imagined that it would be like a combination between the Batman Arkham kind of games, but also somewhat God of War. With Wonder Woman rising up, gaining new armor and weapons, the whole RPG mechanics using her lasso of truth to investigate her enemies to gain information from them. Plus, Wonder Woman has so many villains that she could pull from for games upon games worth of content. Cheetah, Cersei, hell, I wouldn't even mind if they even threw in some Batman characters somehow too. The point was that Wonder Woman looked like it was in great hands until the cracks began to show over time, and unfortunately, as we saw the recent outputs of Warner Bros. Games just across the board, they were all diminishing in quality from not only Suicide Squad, but stuff like Gotham Knights as well. They also cooked multiverses, and outside of Hogwarts Legacy being a resounding success despite the games industry trying to fabricate a boycott around that game, I genuinely always believed that Monolith was one of the crown jewels of Warner Bros. Gaming crown, so to speak. But like I said, in the past few years, outside of Hogwarts Legacy, Warner hasn't exactly been releasing very good games. Even NetherRealm has shown degradation as well. Mortal Kombat 1 was genuinely one of the most disappointing games I played in years. They cleanly rebooted that entire series and they set it up with this brave new world-like mission at the front of it, to remake Mortal Kombat in a new way with characters in unique positions that we haven't seen before. But if you actually played Mortal Kombat 1, you would know that the only real changes were that Liu Kang was now Raiden, and Raiden was just Liu Kang now. I guess Baraka was a good guy too, but beyond that, everyone else just kinda became what they always were pretty much. It was a really disappointing game, not to mention the Marvel-esque nonsense they introduced by trying to shove the multiverse into the plot. The point of all of this is that Warner Bros., for the most part, has, like Mortal Kombat 1, completely lost the plot when it comes to their video games division, and it's plain as day to see. They have systematically ruined almost every single franchise they had and destroyed the goodwill of their foundations over years. Now with Monolith closing down, people are like wondering, why could this happen? Wasn't Wonder Woman supposed to be great? It had Monolith of all things behind it. They know how to make great games. What was going on here? And I think it's a lot of reasons, so let's get into it. Firstly, Warner Bros. Is pretty much broke right now. Well, not entirely of course, but to compare Warner 10 years ago to now, they have pennies compared to the dollars prior to this. They ruined their DC movies. Their comics outside of maybe Batman don't normally perform well as activist writers just continue to ruin these legacy characters. For a more very recent example, as Fandom Pulse reported here, the new Supergirl comic will have an all-transgender writing team. As if these people's genders are somehow important when it comes to writing Supergirl, considering these are men who think they're women. Not to mention that one of the people involved, whose last name is literally Bond villain for crying out loud, notoriously had a trans character in Gotham City, with the now infamous baseball bat with the trans flag on it, as you can see here. The point is that Warner Bros. Has, for years now, systematically ruined every known facet of their business empire by allowing activists to just infiltrate them on pretty much every single level. Gone are the days of the golden Batman Arkham era, when Rocksteady was giving you amazing Batman experiences that felt like they were forged by God himself, with how silky smooth the combat mechanics and gameplay in general felt. Instead, the best they could do is just to give you a live service slop fest where you played as a bunch of sort of villains and grinded for loot as if you were playing Destiny. It was a gigantic mistake, but when I look at Monolith, maybe I was too hopeful. After all, like Rocksteady prior to Suicide Squad, both Rocksteady and Monolith had released pretty banger games in the past. But there has clearly been a point between then and now where these game studios and Warner Bros. In general, they have been completely infiltrated by woke freaks and they just kind of ruined everything. Savvy on Twitter found a bunch of the profiles of the people who worked on this Wonder Woman game at Monolith. Don't harass any of these people, by the way, but once you look at the writing staff at Monolith over Wonder Woman, this cancellation of not just this game but the studio at large, it does start to make more sense. First, of course, we have Cypher of Tyr, a woman who notoriously tried to paint CD Projekt Red as transphobic before the release of Cyberpunk 2077. Cypher, real name Tanya, that's not doxing by the way, she publicly states her own name on LinkedIn so everybody can just relax, went out of their way, as seen here where Savvy detailed how Cypher attempted to try to push the story that CDPR was transphobic against Cyberpunk, only for CDPR to start sending Cypher plenty of free gifts from computer stuff, the Cyberpunk Collector's Edition, free food even, and also a gaming chair. All of which Cypher would flex on Twitter when she would receive these gifts, and coincidentally, once all these gifts were being sent, Cypher's complaining about that transphobia that was apparently such a big problem in Cyberpunk to them, it suddenly disappeared like a fart in the wind. By the way, CDPR didn't really change anything that Cypher complained about either in the game. She just stopped complaining once they started sending her food and toys, which quite literally meant that CDPR bought Cypher's silence through mass merchandise gifts. Anyway, this Cypher, or Tanya, was one of the lead writers on Wonder Woman, yeah, a massive red flag if I ever saw one. Cypher would say this in the wake of Monolith shutting down. Yes, the news is true. I'm a free agent and open to opportunities. Almost 2 years pouring my heart into the Wonder Woman game, RIP Monolith Productions. I effing refuse to share that ghoul's article and do not send it to me if you value not being verbally flayed to the bone. Any of you mother effers say a effing word about us deserving it, I will come for you. Do not try it with me or any of my colleagues. I'm logging off for a bit and try to process this news. So Cypher is yet again throwing baseless threats because Monolith closed down, which isn't the fault of you or me. Like I said, I was genuinely looking forward to this game because of Monolith's past adventures. However, to be fair, the games that I played from Monolith did not in fact have the writers attached to those games like this Wonder Woman game had, as I'll show you. So as I looked at Cypher, or Tanya's LinkedIn, they're credited as a senior writer on Wonder Woman, yet as you can see here, they've actually never written any other video games prior to this. They just kind of went from pushing some I Need Diverse Games agenda campaign to suddenly landing this job in Monolith somehow. I wager that they got their job because they champion ideology. That's the only sensible explanation for any of this. But I mean, Cypher can get mad about me pointing this out or come for me, as they said, but I'm not really attacking them either way. I'm just looking at what's presented here and showing you guys. Usually, if you're a senior writer on a game, you have other games that you've written before. But in this case, they did it clearly. I mean, I don't control Cypher's LinkedIn, so they posted this of their own free will. So already, my pattern recognition in my brain is starting to go off, but let's look at the other writers too. We then have Alex Markman, whose other gaming writing credit, besides Wonder Woman, is Gotham Knights, a game that was critically panned by audiences and reviewers alike, also a sweet baby game. I mean, here's what one critic review said about Gotham Knights. Not being content with being one of the most soulless products released under the Warner Bros. Label, it is also extremely underwhelming from a technical point of view. Gotham Knights was originally developed as a multi-gen title, but those versions were cancelled. Despite this, the visuals underwhelm and fail to impress, and managed to look worse than the last major Batman installment released 7 years prior. Capping at a mere 30 FPS might be excusable if this boasted the most cutting-edge visuals on the market, but it manages to look cheap and dated. For a AAA production from Warner Bros., this should have been a visual tour de force with top writing talent and having evolved the gameplay to compete with its contemporaries. Maybe it can be salvaged over time with updates, but currently it's one of the most droll and sloppily designed AAA products of 2022. And yeah, my girlfriend bought me Gotham Knights, not knowing the Sweet Baby was involved at the time, just to be clear, and when it came out that year, so I ended up playing the game for a little bit and I gave it a try, and fellas, let me tell you, as someone who loves the Arkham games, Gotham Knights was one of the biggest pieces of crap I had the displeasure of ever playing. Usually I can get through subpar games, but Gotham Knights was just somehow uglier, ran worse, and had less features than Arkham Knight or even Arkham Asylum. Despite being released 7 years after Arkham Knight and yet again copying the exact design mechanics from Rocksteady's masterpieces too. And the story from what I played was terrible. Again, the writer here who worked on this was also on Wonder Woman, so that doesn't fill me with much confidence if I'm being honest. Then we have another writer on Wonder Woman, Anne LeMay, and I mean, just look at the profile, it tells you everything. She, they, the flags, BLM, the profile picture, it's all so typical of what to expect at this point, it's actually kind of incredible. Again, don't harass anyone here, just look at these things and you can see the connective tissue between this and everything else. Here's some of the stuff these people retweet, talking to genderqueer people, blah blah blah, the usual talking points. All the things that the gaming community, really everybody, has kind of just resoundingly rejected for well over a year now. Then we have another writer whose name is Ellie, neurodivergent apparently because of course they are, an ex-mortician, which is something alright. And of course they live in California because they all do apparently. Here's Ellie stating that they're all about diverse games, specifically with the rainbow. So we all know what that means. Yep, it all checks out, fellas. Then there's another writer named Luther who is both a he, she, and they. They say that they're horny on their main account. Alrighty then. Here's this Luther who I have no idea what they are, but they confirm here that they worked on Wonder Woman and they are saddened by the game falling apart behind the scenes. Then there was this other person who worked on Wonder Woman. They posted this, I believe, from the Monolith Discord chat. Their name is Tracy, they, them, of course, like always, and they said, "Hi everyone, this message is 100% unofficial and unauthorized. Thank you all so much for your fandom and your kind words and for all the time you spend with us. I love all of your Nemesis stories and I'm so brokenhearted we won't be able to share Wonder Woman with you. Don't listen to anything anyone said about the project stalling or failing. It was going to be absolutely killer." Okay, fair enough I guess, even though we have nothing to go on besides that one CGI shot of Wonder Woman in that one trailer. But it's this next part where Tracy speaks where my pattern recognition in my brain just started to fire off the alarm. Here's what they said. "I know every developer will say this about something they worked on, but it was going to be amazing. I am not allowed to say much, but I can at least say that every single person was pouring their heart into it and it showed. Our narrative team had a fantastic and deeply meaningful story, especially in these really difficult times. I felt the world really needed the story we were telling. A fantastic and deeply meaningful story in these difficult times." Fellas, am I wrong here, but is my pattern recognition just taking what was said here and just translating it into this game was supposed to own the chuds and be a woman power game, or am I interpreting this wrong? Because what are these difficult times that Tracy is speaking about? Like the game industry in general having layoffs? I don't know how Wonder Woman's story is supposed to speak about greedy executives laying off developers. I mean, unless the game's story's about Maxwell Lord or someone like that using Themyscira like a slave trade or something. But I think the more likely scenario here is that Wonder Woman's story was probably about how all men are evil, specifically men with blonde hair and whose names are Donald and Trump. Or that people who don't believe in all the gender stuff are bad. I don't know, man. I feel like they were just gonna fill Themyscira with a bunch of butch lesbians that were gonna be kissing and slobbering and scissoring 24/7 and then make Wonder Woman into this ultra feminist that just kind of kills men exclusively. And every bad guy in the game was probably going to be a white guy or at least a white woman for sure. And every man that you would meet in the game would be a sissy weakling, and every commander or capable individual was a woman. Pretty much like Horizon Zero Dawn. Like, that's what it was going to be. More like Forbidden West, actually. And look, maybe I'm wrong, okay? Maybe this game would have been amazing, but I don't know, man. Looking at that writing team and what they've worked on, which was basically either nothing at all previously or Gotham Knights and all the posts about gender stuff and we love diverse games and blah blah blah. It just kind of all came across as if this Wonder Woman game was just being designed to own the chud, so to speak, and that's it. And look, maybe the games industry would chow down on this and give it glowing scores because it was a big FU to conservatives, or I guess men in general. But if you ask me, this supposed plot and who worked on it were likely going to release a nuclear-level DC game that would divide people even more. And just become the next punching bag for the internet if we're being honest. Like, Wonder Woman being written exclusively by women is already the biggest red flag if I'm being honest. Because firstly, Wonder Woman was created by a man to begin with, and this whole stupid mantra that not only games are doing this, but like all of the industry for years now, where you were only able to write things if you look like the thing and the thing that you're doing is beyond stupid if you ask me. It's kind of like that new Black Panther game at Electronic Arts, which apparently has an all-black writing team. despite the fact that the character Black Panther and Wakanda were made by a bunch of white guys. Like, it's just so stupid and pandering. Like, you don't need to look or identify or like something 100% with whatever that you're doing in order to write about it. This whole notion or this very rigid way of doing things like this is a big reason why we are where we are right now. Like I said with that Supergirl comic, they have an all-trans woman team. Like, what does that even mean for the quality of the book exactly? Why even announce that they're all trans? Why does it matter? So you got a bunch of guys saying they're girls writing a book about a girl. Like, okay? I'm just really sick of this concept, man. I really am. Ghost of Tsushima was made by a bunch of white people in California, yet they made what is arguably one of the most authentic representations of Japanese culture, despite the game's art director and the main game director in general being two white guys. Now you tell me, would Ghost of Tsushima suddenly be a better game simply because the art director or whoever else was now Japanese? Or is it just possible that as long as the people who are passionate about making the art are just good at what they do? Like, Ask Create Shadows has a white guy director too, and the quality and messaging behind Shadows compared to Tsushima, I mean, they couldn't be more polar opposites in terms of how fans feel about these two games. It's almost as if your gender, race, or whatever you identify with simply has no bearing on the quality or purpose when it comes to making things. Wonder Woman being written by a bunch of leftist, liberal, Black Lives Matter activists means nothing, nor does it mean the game would be amazing just because they're there. If anything, you probably should have had a man on there, and I mean a man, not a trans woman, on the writing staff there to ensure that the feminists didn't just constantly go off the deep end with their messaging and writing. But there's a few reasons as to why this could get cancelled. I decided to ask Grok on Twitter to compile all the potential reasons as to why Wonder Woman would get cancelled, and Grok pretty much just told it how it is. Here's what it said. The game's cancellation also coincided with the closure of 3 other studios, and Warner Bros. Games San Diego indicating a restructuring driven by financial pressures rather than the quality of the teams or their work. Reports suggest the Wonder Woman game faced a troubled development cycle, including a reboot and a change in directors in early 2024, which likely escalated costs and delayed progress. Industry speculation points to rising AAA game development expenses and Warner Bros. Reluctance to continue funding a project that didn't align with their revised, safer investment priorities. That ending part is key. Warner Bros. Reluctance to continue funding something that didn't align with their revised and safer investment priorities. It means that Warner Bros. Knew that their games that championed feminism and gender nonsense were not selling. They lost $200 million on Suicide Squad. As far as we know, Wonder Woman so far had at least $100 million thrown in the fire, trying to make that game work too, and clearly that amounted to nothing. And then Grok, however, continues with its scathing take. Additionally, some sources hint at concerns over the game's direction, with rumors of potential live service elements or a heavy-handed narrative focus that may have echoed the missteps of other recent WB flops. However, the official stance from Warner Bros. Emphasizes that the cancellation stemmed from a mismatch with their strategic goals, not a reflection on Monolith's talent or the game's potential. And then, as you can see at the end here, it says that Wonder Woman was an ambitious undertaking that ultimately couldn't survive the company's pivot away from riskier ventures. Again, this all just screams to me that this Wonder Woman game had 2 really big problems ahead of it. One was the funds, of course, because Warner Bros. Is sinking down in many different ways, but also it was the writing, story, and characters. Because there's nothing risky about a AAA single-player game. Those sorts of games do well all the time. Well, the ones that don't attack their audiences or deliver slop, but you get what I mean. The live service elements, I mean, Shadow of War had loot boxes that they did remove eventually, but maybe they were just adding a sort of Assassin's Creed-like cash shop to the game, kind of like how Valhalla had. Which, I mean, yeah, that would suck, but I just don't buy any of that stuff personally, and I would just play the game normally the same way I did with Valhalla. But still, my pattern recognition is just firing off, guys. This just tells me, looking at these writers, that we were in for one insufferable slop of a game. And likely the amount of money it would have taken to change this game's direction was just money that WB didn't have ready at the moment. So they're likely going to do a tax write-off like they did with the Batgirl movie too. Even Grump said that he spoke to Warner Bros. Staff prior to the story exploding. And they told him if you don't pander to trans ideology specifically, that they'll just fire you. The entirety of Warner is swamped in DEI policies, guys. I've reported on that aplenty already in other videos. And there's no way that Wonder Woman, a game about a female superhero, the female superhero, was not going to pander insanely hard as well. It's impossible. Finally, this brings me to Asif Sadiq. He's the chief head of diversity and all of that at Warner Bros. Fandom Pulse found a clip of Asif Sadiq speaking to other diversity HR people, who you will notice in a second that not a single one of them is a white guy or even a white woman. But here's what Warner Bros. Head of diversity had to say about diversity at Warner, so please watch.
And if I can just add on to that point, because I think it's such a important point, even beyond leaders, there's always those few people who you'll never change. You'll never convince them. You can try for up until the end of eternity and it will still not happen. We waste so much energy doing that sometimes as individuals, whether you're in a leadership position or in a team and so on. Focus on the ones who want to change, because that way you start changing culture. And if you change culture, hopefully those people who don't want to come around will start saying that this place isn't the way it used to be, and they'll leave themselves, which is great. So I think it is about how much of your energy you consume on some of those things. And this point has come up a few times earlier as well, that rather than focusing on those things that you can't impact or you can't change, focusing on the things you can impact and you can change is so important. Even when we're trying to look at, potentially what sort of programs are we running, what sort of things we're doing, I think it's a great opportunity to double down our efforts on things, to do an audit of what's worked, what hasn't worked, where do we put more effort into, where do we reduce effort that, didn't necessarily have the outcome. So don't necessarily see something, if you're reducing something or changing something, as a negative. It can be a positive. It's how you create, that mindset. And I think that the sort of looking after yourself as someone who works in the D&I space, or supports the D&I space is so important, because not just this year, but the last couple of years have been huge. Yeah. And your mental health, your well-being, taking time out to just say it is. And by the way, there's no in my perception that there's nothing wrong with saying, do you know what, it is a bit too much, I'm going to take a bit of time, I'm going to move away from this, I don't feel ready to have that conversation right now. That's fine. You must look after yourself, because we need you people, we need each other to continue this journey. So it is important not to be too tough on yourself, because no one has all the answers in this space. But as long as you try, I think we can get there.
By the way, this guy also admitted before that despite corporate America spending well over $8 billion on DEI practices, that they have resoundingly not worked at all and have in fact failed. So the guy is a legit professional grifter working a job that is genuinely pointless and only exists to fill companies like Warner with more activists like him. As you can see here, he's been the head of diversity for almost 3 years now at Warner Bros. Discovery. And in that time, and even before it, they've just been bleeding money and losing their pants when it comes to their movies, shows, games, and all of them just resoundingly failing. Interestingly, how the correlation between the mass loss of product aligns perfectly with when DEI was implemented into Warner Bros. The point of this is all to be shown as simple. Wonder Woman, whether these writers or Discord people want to cope with it, the proof was in the actions and past creations of the people that were involved with it. It's very clear to me that Monolith was likely just like Rocksteady, another Ship of Theseus situation again. It may be the same ship, but the crew is probably different. Therefore, despite the name being on the ship's hull, it's not really the same ship at all if the people aren't there who made those great things to begin with. If you ask me, Wonder Woman would have probably just been a massive PR talking down moment in video games. Who knows? Maybe it could have been amazing. And all of my problems were not present at all. But let's not be stupid, guys. This is Warner Bros. Everything that they have had going on has been nothing short of confirming that the usual suspects are indeed running this asylum the same way they have the other ones too. So ultimately, Wonder Woman, the game, is dead. Yeah, it kinda sucks, but if it was just going to be another Dustborn all men are bad game with a heavy dose of feminism, I think we, and most importantly Warner themselves, have dodged another 50 cal bullet straight to the dome most likely. Again, don't harass anyone, I'm just connecting patterns, fellas, but let me know what you think. What do you think of this game's cancellation? Was it just because of corporate greed, or was there something foul in paradise behind the scenes? Maybe one day someone who worked on this will speak out and say things, but until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.